Let's make some fun quilt blocks using 2.5-inch scraps, or you can use leftover fabrics, scraps, crumbs to make these blocks. These blocks are great for borders, table runners, modern quilts, and anything you can think of, it will work. Have fun and get creative so all of your scraps will not go to waste. But let's get started. First, we are going to start simple. If you are using 2.5-inch strips, we are going to want 2.5-inch squares. Technically, you could use a 5-inch square, trim them down, or even a layer cake scrap or anything, you name it, and trim it down to a 2.5-inch square. However, I am using crumbs today because the outcome will look cooler, in my opinion, give it more character. So with that said, I'm just going to start piecing things together without a thought. Now I have a 2.5-inch square ruler, so it will make things easier on myself, but what I could do is just cut a square out and have horizontal pieced lines, or I can rotate my small ruler and have diagonal seams within this tiny quilt block. Then with those trimmings, I can save them because you can use them for the next quilt block, because here I am using them and laying them wherever. And just a friendly reminder, don't think about it, just piece it together. Afterwards, if you have an area where multiple seam allowances are bunching up, I recommend cutting it off. It will not only make things easier for you, but when you or a longarm quilters quilt it, you both will highly appreciate it as well. So all you have to do is just keep piecing until you can cut a 2.5-inch square out. Another fun tip is if you have fabric that has a stunning print as a focal point, like a flower, animal, or basically any design, you can cut it out instead of chopping it up. Then for our first block, you will need 3 scrappy 2.5-inch squares, 2 background 2.5-inch squares, 2 background 2.5-inch by 6.5-inch rectangles, and lastly 2 2.5-inch by 8.5-inch background rectangles as well. Then you're going to place them like so, and we are going to sew everything together. When making this block, think outside of the box. You could start a lovely checkerboard postage stamp style crumble quilt, or alternate between a crumble and a print or solid square using up more of your scraps. But today I'm just using a solid background fabric, but once again, use up your scraps. Lastly, you could also continue this pattern and use it as a border for a quilt. Sometimes when we use fat quarters for a quilt pattern, there will be extra fabrics laying around, so you can go ahead and piece some blocks together and expand that quilt pattern using a border. Basically, the point for these crumble blocks is to give you ideas and have fun. Then for our second block, you will need to create 2.5-inch squares and 2.5-inch by 6.5-inch rectangles using up your crumbs. Once again, it is perfect for jelly roll scraps or even your crumbs, and as you can see, I am using a mixture of the two. I even sewed several crumbs together in a strip set and went ahead and cut it out to a 2.5-inch by 6.5-inch rectangle. But today we are going to make a plus block. And for this block, you will need 2 scrappy 2.5-inch squares and 1 scrappy 2.5-inch by 6.5-inch rectangle. And then you will need 4 background 2.5-inch squares. We will sew all of our squares together first to form a row, then sew all of your rows together to create a 6.5-inch square block. If you were to piece this block side by side, the plus sign will pretty much get hidden. So instead, I'm going to add a 1-inch border. To do so, I will need 2 background 1.5-inch by 6.5-inch rectangles and 2 background 1.5-inch by 8.5-inch rectangles. You'll sew the shorter rectangles to your block first on opposite side. Then lastly, your 1.5-inch by 8.5-inch rectangles to the other sides. And you'll be finished and left with a 8.5-inch square. Now you'll be able to make multiple plus signs and lay them out side by side. But either way, have fun with these blocks, and I hope you've enjoyed more fun ideas using up your 2.5-inch scraps and your crumbs. So if you could please take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button, Hit the notification bell so you can be notified for your next amazing quilt project.